Hello, Paulo Leite here, record collector, and this is part 2 of Joint Custody, a great record shop in Washington, D.C. Now let's look at their movie soundtrack collection. Carrie, the Brian De Palma classic. Music by Italian composer Pino Donaggio. Donaggio was a master composer with dozens and dozens of films. I have always been a huge fan of his work. I don't know why Italian composers are so good. Maybe it's something in their water. Nakoi Katsi, the third film in the Katsi trilogy by Godfrey Reggio. Never Say Never Again, a surprisingly good soundtrack by Michel Legrand. Brimstone and Trickle. Although I am not a fan of Dennis Potter, more Sting is always better. I found a good number of Japanese soundtracks here. I don't know a lot about them, but I know they have a very dedicated fan base. Rosemary's Baby, a beautiful soundtrack by Christophe Comeda. He was a brilliant musician and composer. He died young in 1969, but until then, he released a number of jazz albums that are great. And even though his career was cut short, he did work on an impressive number of films. Lots of albums here that you won't find easily with great prices. Lipstick, with music by Michel Polnareff. I know people hate the movie, but I think the soundtrack is really good. It's short, but good. Lost Horizon. This is a compilation of soundtracks by Dmitri Tiomkin, one of the best composers from the Hollywood classical period. And this album contains some of his best work. I generally don't like re-recordings because most conductors tend to take too much liberty with the source material, but I think this one is fairly faithful to Tiomkin's work. Now let's look at jazz. Joint Custody has a more than generous jazz collection. Feeling Good from 1960 by The Three Sounds. They're pretty much forgotten by most people these days, but they were really good. The Magnificent Pianos of Ronnie Aldridge from 1963. Gorgeous album. I have always been a huge fan of these Phase 4 editions. They were issued by Decca in London during the 60s and the 70s. Many of these are only available on vinyl. With or Without from 1954 by Gene Ammons. Jazz bebop at its best. Big George Benson fan here. I am not really into jazz improvisation, but I like this one. Body, Mind and Spirit from 1977 by Black Renaissance. Behind the Sun from 1988 by Clyde Kreiner. To me, this is one of the best fusion albums ever produced in the 80s. This is an album that deserves to be rediscovered. Get this album, you thank me later. Prelude from 1973 by Eumir Deodato. I'm such a huge fan of his work. And his concert with Ayrton Moreira from 1974. And you can get them for peanuts. Again, sometimes you get great vinyl for practically nothing if you know what to look for. Deodato is one of those names the average person won't recognize. But he has a long and stunning career. He worked with Sinatra, Bjork, Kool and the Gang, Roberta Flack, Antonio Carlos Jobim, and tons of others. His granddaughter is married to Justin Bieber. Well, nobody's perfect. This is a great collection. Tons of great albums here. Coleman Hawkins encounters Ben Webster from 1959. Two great artists in peak form. You Know You're Wrong, Don't You Brother? From 1974 by Walter Heath. This one is probably misplaced. This is more a soul-funk album, and a great one. Hair is Beautiful from 1969 by Barney Castle. Great album. Barney Castle was a stunning jazz guitar player. He had an incredible career. He released his first album in 1954, and after that, he released over 40 albums. Because he was so good, he was highly sought after as a session musician. He must appear on at least 50 more albums by other artists. Wow, Carmen McRae sings Lover Man and other Billie Holiday classics from 1962. To me, this is probably the best homage album ever. Billie Holiday was a big influence in Carmen McRae, and she had died just 2 years before these recordings. You can really feel McRae's love and respect for Billie Holiday. As far as I know, the Merrimack Community College Jazz Lab Band released only 4 albums. This is the very first one from 1972. I don't know much about them, but these recordings are great and pretty hard to find. This Chris Meyer from 1982 is signed, ready, willing and stable. I like it, but it seems he hasn't recorded much. That's the only album I know from him. Blues Moods from 1960 by Blue Mitchell. I love him. Here with Wynton Kelly, Sam Jones and Roy Brooks. This album is amazing. The Soul is Willing from 1963 by Shirley Scott. Here with her husband Stanley Turrentine. And Roland. Shirley Scott plays the big bands from 1966. She was a brilliant organist with more than 40 albums. She and I share the same birthday, 40 years apart. And here's one of the best jazz albums ever recorded. Clark Terry from 1955. Tuma is one of the most beautiful jazz tracks I've ever heard. Everything is right here. I bought this album in the 90s when it was released on CD by Verve as part of its Elite series. Of course, Joint Custody has some exotica, as well as plenty of folk. Now let's take a look at their rap and hip-hop section. These are not genres I know well, but they have plenty of it. Alternative, punk and indie. Oh, Fruit from 2022 by The A's. A very nice vocal-based project. I hope they stick around and release more. Triptych from 1988 by The Beavis Front, a British band. I love them. This was, in fact, the first album I heard from them around 1990. They had such a unique style. And here's another one from them, Hit Squad from 2004. Very different from the previous album from 16 years earlier, but just as great. Play Dead from 2021 by Blue Anxiety. This is a fascinating album. It sounds like a perfect blend of 1985 and 2025. I enjoyed it very much. Those synths are gorgeous. As you can see, Joint Custody's collection of alternative, punk and indie is quite large. There's also electronic, house music, techno, and even an experimental and noise section. Some of these albums can be fascinating. This Psychic Stress Soundtracks from 2005 by Joe Colley is very hard to listen to, with different combinations of buzzing sounds. It really creates a sound landscape worthy of the title. Some classical, some library music, spoken word, and of course, world music. This is a very strange album. It says 4 tracks super stereo, but nowhere else it will provide any information about it, like we would find on any true multi-channel record of the same period. I suspect this is just for show. Histoire de Melody Nelson from 1971 by Serge Gainsbourg. Great album. Gainsbourg was one of those artists impossible to replicate. His voice, style, sound, there will never be anyone like him. Their gospel section is quite good. The same thing with reggae, with plenty of albums underneath the displays. Their singles collection is also quite good, with lots of great names. Oh, cassettes. I almost forgot about those. Yes, they have them too. Joint Custody also has a few VHS tapes, DVDs, books, and vintage magazines. I had a great time at Joint Custody. Great atmosphere, great sound, great collection, and fair prices. Browsing through the shop, I kind of felt like a kid back in the early 80s. If you're in Washington, D.C. and you like vinyl, just drop by. And now that I'm done, it's time for me to hit those waffle fries at Chick-fil-A. And you should be here with me. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. More great content coming soon. And remember, visit record shops, buy records. Music is life. Thank you.